Hello readers, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist. I am talking about the Road to Nowhere trilogy. If I can find words, which I have lots of words. I have so many notes. But you ever feel like the more you love something, the harder it is to talk about? Words! So I literally just finished the Book of Flora, which is the third one, 5 minutes ago, and I feel like I do better with reviews whenever it's super fresh on my mind. I can't really sit on it like a lot of other people because then I kind of lose my momentum. But I have been wanting to tell everyone about this series. I have been telling everyone about this series for so long, ever since I found the first book, and I just, Okay, the way I typically do my reviews is I tell you the premise, plot, world building, and character development. I'm going to try and stick to that, definitely branch out a little bit from that because there are 3 books. So let's get this started. Alright, The Road to Nowhere. Nowhere is the name of a city in these books, or village, a town, not totally sure on the size of it. Series starts off with the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, continues with the Book of Etta, and finishes with the Book of Flora. These covers are absolutely gorgeous, I think. They do have that really velvety cover. I know I've seen in a lot of videos that can annoy people. I like them. I love just running my hand over the covers, but maybe that's just me. So, The Road to Nowhere trilogy. We'll start off with the premise for The Road to Nowhere. Basically, this mysterious, unexplained illness happens at the very, very beginning of the Book of the Unnamed Midwife, and it's killing mothers who are giving birth and the babies that they give birth to. It's, for a while at least, you cannot be pregnant and live through birth, neither you nor the baby. That doesn't stay true for that long. I think when it initially happens, no one can survive it. About halfway through or towards the end of the Unnamed Midwife, you realize there are some people having babies, but in each town or village or city, there are only maybe 1 baby a year out of, let's say, a population of 200 to 400 people. Men are outnumbering women, which is a huge point in these books. A very tough point. And there's a lot of exploration of how people deal with that. Through this series, you are seeing so many different cities and towns, and each one has their very own culture. They each have their own way of dealing with this low birth. And it's fascinating. By the way, did I mention that this is the queerest book series I have ever read, and I think the queerest book series I have ever heard of in my entire life. Also, trigger warning. I have lots and lots of trigger warnings for this. Hey everyone, never mind the background noise, it's raining right now. I was just editing the video and I forgot to add a trigger warning for miscarriage. In book 3, the Book of Flora, there is a character who has a miscarriage. There's quite a few details in it. I think it could be really jarring for a lot of people, but I loved this scene. I have never, ever even heard of a detailed scene of miscarriage in a book, or really even in many movies. I think it was awesome. It was super well done. The character has a very supportive friend with them while they are miscarrying who is helping them through this miscarriage. I loved this part of the book, but it can be very triggering. I think that's the only thing that I forgot. It's a pretty trigger-heavy book series, but I think it's so worth it. And again, it's not super graphic. The miscarriage is one of the most graphic, triggering scenes. But again, I think it was so worth it. It is so important to talk about these things. Anyways, get back to my super exciting video. In my last video, I discussed Cats in Camera and her awesome video on trigger warnings as spoilers. In this case, I'm not going to do that. There's enough of the triggers happening throughout these books. It's not really a spoiler. Like, it's a part of the world. Yeah. So, trigger warnings. Let me look at my list because there's a lot of them. Slavery is a big one. Oh my gosh. Rape is a huge one that happens in every single book. It's not particularly graphic, but it does happen. I think it was fairly easy to read through, like as easy as something like that can be. The sex and the rape were never graphic or overly detailed. The sex was really awesome in these books because it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't graphic. It wasn't corny. It had a real purpose to it. Sex was for seeking like a lot of comfort. There are a lot of relationships in these books without there being a ton of romance, which is something that I really enjoyed about them. Other triggers. Genital cutting, not really in the first book, but in the second and third, there's quite a bit of discussion of genital cutting. Again, nothing really detailed, nothing graphic. In slavery and rape, there is also a lot of sexual slavery and like assault and battery, people beating each other up. I would say that the most triggering part of these books, the hardest part to get through, was the book of Etta in the first chapter. Etta immediately comes upon two people who have a female slave, and the guy immediately shows her off as a slave by showing, or attempting to show, what she can do, which that was stopped quickly, thank goodness, but also a lot of discussion of cutting in the first chapter. That is the hardest part for me with this series, was the first chapter of the Book of Etta. It's definitely the most triggering of all the books. So, now, let us get into plot. The Book of the Unnamed Midwife, I think, can kind of stand on its own, which I liked. I know a lot of people don't like it when a book in a series can stand on its own because it doesn't give them the drive to read the other books. I liked that because as someone who doesn't really read a lot of series, I like not feeling the push. I like that there is a book that can stand on its own two legs. In most series, either in movies or books, you have the books come out and then long after the books are written, someone decides, oh, I'm going to write a prequel. I'm going to get some more money out of this thing. The Book of the Unnamed Midwife, I would call a prequel in the Road to Nowhere series, but it was also the first book written, which I think is a nice change. I think if you're going to write a prequel, maybe it should be the first book you write, but maybe that's an unpopular opinion. I don't know. The nice thing, like, I think you can skip the first book and just read the second two. You'll be fine. You won't necessarily miss anything super important. The book is referenced a lot, though, in these two books. So I think it's good to read the first one so you have some idea of what they're discussing in the other two. So, the Unnamed Midwife, as you may be able to tell from the title, we are never given her actual name, as far as we know. Every group that she meets, she kind of gives them a different name. As far as we know, any one of those could have been her actual name, but considering the character, I don't think she would have given it up. So, she got the fever that is plaguing women, and not just pregnant women, women in general. A lot of women are getting sick. She gets it. She's one of the few that survives it. And she's in San Francisco. She wakes up from this fever. This guy sneaks into her house. She manages to escape. And she basically goes trekking across America, just looking for people, looking for a place to settle. It's really hard not only to find people, because like 99% of the population has died, but to find people that you can trust. There are so many cities that work in slavery, and this book being the prequel, being the time that the plague happens, there's a lot of unrest. Like, no one's really built their cultures back up. Everyone's trying to find out, how do we survive? How do we get through this? And what I liked about this book is a real exploration of loneliness. Like, you read a lot of books about fevers and plagues and stuff in dystopia, and there's usually like a group of people who kind of stick it together. And a lot of this book, most of this book, she's completely alone. So it's a really good exploration of loneliness and kind of how that can make you feel, what it can make you give up in order to be around other people. And later on in this book, there's some interesting religion discussions in these books, particularly, or specifically, Mormonism. She comes across a group of Mormons, and they believe that they have to be completely immune. Like, sure, they have 3 women and over 40 men, I want to say. But they're like, oh, we can marry them off, and they'll get pregnant, and they'll live, and they'll raise their kids. And she's like, no, that's not going to happen. Also, forgot to mention the midwife. It's a lot of bouncing back on whether she's a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a midwife. I think the idea is that she was a nurse who worked in labor and delivery, so she is able to help people. She doesn't necessarily rescue the female slaves that she comes across, but she dresses as a man throughout this book for protection. It is not safe to be out there and be a woman. And she will kind of trick people into thinking that she wants the female slave for sex. She will take them away from the group, and she will give them birth control that she found at like an old hospital, maybe her old hospital, because she doesn't want them to go through birth and die. Yeah. So, a lot of that. I'm going to move on to the second book. There's so much more I want to say on this, but I think I should wait for the world building and the characters. So, the Book of Etta, and I have a list of years here somewhere. The Book of Etta takes place 100 years after the Book of the Unnamed Midwife. This wasn't my favorite of the 3. It was my least favorite of the 3. It kind of, the pacing was a little off, I think. You'd have like this climax of something super exciting, and then nothing would happen for a while, and then a climax of something super exciting, and nothing would happen for a little while. So not my favorite, but there is quite a bit that goes on in this book. Etta has a very different approach than the Unnamed whenever it comes to dealing with slaves and their slavers. A lot of this book, you can see the little arch on the book cover. The names have changed a little bit of places. They're still kind of identifiable if you look at a map. Etta is afraid of St. Louis, which is abbreviated on the map as STL. So Etta and Etta's people know St. Louis as Estiel. That is what they call it. They're all very afraid of Estiel. There's really, really bad people there, and you eventually find out about the Lion. The Lion is kind of the man in charge of Estiel. He takes a lot of women from the surrounding areas. He goes out, he has his people go out raiding for him, for women specifically, as well as for drugs, for some trading, but really he just kind of takes whatever he wants. So, again, this book, like the first one, is a lot of exploration of different cultures and how they deal with the low birth rate, which has gone up a little bit by this book. You're getting, maybe 2 or 3 babies a year in cities and towns and stuff. So, a little bit better. And the Book of Flora, like I said, I just finished that earlier today, it goes back and forth. It'll be the 100 years after, so it'll pick up where the Book of Etta left off, and then it'll go forward to Flora's present time, which is 40 years after that. So it's 140 years after the events of the Unnamed Midwife, and 40 years after the events of the Book of Etta. They have, the dates are like 104 in the Nowhere Codex, and year 144 in the Nowhere Codex. Nowhere, as I said, is the main place. So the Unnamed Midwife eventually ends up in Nowhere. The Book of Etta picks up in Nowhere, where Etta was raised. And Flora, Nowhere's not really in this book as much, but Flora was in Nowhere for a small period of time in her life. And at one point, Flora goes to a library and sees this old poster hanging up. And if we think of that poster as being printed in the last year before everyone died, which, for the sake of making everything easier, we'll say that, then the year of the dying, which is when all shit went down, was 2021, so that would make the Book of Etta and part of the Book of Flora happening in 2125, and the 40 years after would be 2165. This is kind of a cool thing with this dystopia, is that it's not just, here's our lives right now. You explore 140 years of events kind of as they happen. Alright, so now on to the world building. World building kind of takes place throughout this entire series. I mean, every time you come up to a city, there is some time to world build for that particular city. And there's a lot of different ones in this series. And action-wise, there's not a ton of action happening in this book. A lot of it is the Unnamed wandering through the world alone, trying to figure out like what she's gonna do, what she's looking for, all of that. But in that, there is a lot of world building. Like, yeah, nothing really happens, but that is the world. The world is lonely. The world does not have a very high population, and the population that you do come across is often very, very dangerous. These are not happy books. These are like dark and broody and very much about finding yourself, discovering who you are, coming to terms with this new world, how you survive in this new world. I think the world building is really, really good. You know what this world is in reading this book. You kind of know what to expect, and these books get a lot darker, but it's nothing you don't expect from the world building in the first book, because it's like, you know, bad stuff is gonna happen because that's just what this world is like. So good world building. I guess I don't have that much to say about it. And the characters. Oh my gosh, the characters. Like I said, this series is so queer. Another important thing to note with the world building. I'm gonna go ahead and set these up here. As I said, you can't really give birth safely, for the most part, in this series. And that really brings up the subject of sexuality. Like I said, these books are queer as fuck. So, you have different cultures, different approaches to this, and largely the approach is that being gay is not really accepted in most places, because you cannot procreate if you are having sex with someone of the same body. Somewhere in the second book, they are discussing old world books and the diaries from this new world, and the council in charge will take the books and cut out the word abortion, and they'll cut out the word lesbian. So something you notice throughout this series is that the original language a lot of times has been lost or purposefully cut out of the language. You don't really know the word for trans, which is a huge deal in the second book. A lot of people don't really know. No one knows the word trans or transgender or transsexual or anything like that. There's a different term for it kind of in every city or town as it comes up as a subject. I believe one of the characters is intersex in the third book, as far as I can tell. But they have their own word for it. So not having our language, you're not entirely sure. That's kind of what it sounds like. But so much of the LGBTQ language has been completely lost, and so many of the concepts are having to be rediscovered. You don't learn some people are gay, some people are lesbian, some people are trans, whatever. You learn, oh, I'm a boy, and I have feelings for other boys. What do I do with this? I'm not really allowed to do that here. I have to procreate, like, even though procreation can very easily kill you as a female-bodied person, it's still like you still have to try, because if you're not trying, then you're not trying to bring up the population. So, a lot of discussion of sexuality and gender in these books, and that is what was so awesome. The Unnamed Midwife is, as far as I can tell, bisexual. She's mainly into females. She also sleeps with a lot of men. But there's not really any trans characters until the second book. But if there were trans characters, I feel like the midwife might actually be pansexual, but because that's never actually something that's brought up, we're going to say the Unnamed is bisexual. She is... There's a lot of terms that she uses, but I'm going to say that she was a nurse in labor and delivery at a hospital. So she knows birth control and gynecology and all of that. She helps women that she comes across. So if you have some slavers who have some female slaves, she goes around dressing up as a man for protection, which that's a big thing to remember when comparing these books to each other. The first book, she is a male for protection only. She's very much female identified. However, she will dress up as a male as she goes around adventuring so that she can protect herself, and she will go up to slavers and trade with them for half an hour with one or both or however many of the female slaves, pretending that she wants to have sex with them, that she's buying the service. Really, when she takes them away from the group, she got a bunch of birth control from a hospital somewhere along the line, and she will give them birth control and tell them how to use it, give them food if she has time, hear their story so she can write their story down, because she wants to make sure that they don't have kids, especially right now, because having kids will most likely kill you. And then we get into the Book of Etta. Things get much more queer and much more complicated. Etta, I don't really know what pronouns to use for them. Etta is Etta when she is in nowhere, and Eddie when he is out exploring. Also dresses as a male, initially learned to dress male for protection, but you can see in the book that Eddie is very much male identified. He kind of came across as more gender fluid in that book, but I think a lot of that is because he was exploring him, maybe not exploring himself, but again, you don't really have the language for sexuality and gender, so he doesn't really understand who he is or how to be himself, especially in this world, especially in Nowhere, where he grew up, because as far as Nowhere is concerned, Etta is a woman. Etta has always been a woman. Etta will always be a woman. But Eddie's like, I don't really feel that way, and I can't really talk about it. I don't know what to do with that. And Eddie eventually meets up with Flora, who's the main character for the third book. Flora is a male to female trans person. She was cut. As far as I can understand, the balls were cut. But goes around as a woman. This is like a little spoilery, but I'm telling you this because it wasn't really brought up until later in the book. But in the book of Etta, Flora talks about horsewomen, and it's really hard to understand what exactly they're trying to say until they finally blatantly tell you. So I will tell you now. A horsewoman is Flora's term for being trans. And there are different terms for it throughout the third book whenever they're visiting other places. Because language has not been preserved. And Etta was... Not only was this my least favorite of the 3 books because of the pacing, but Etta was also a pretty unlikable character. I think a lot of it is that Eddie, switching back and forth a lot here, does not really know who he is, doesn't like having anything assumed about him by others, but it's hard to not make assumptions whenever someone else doesn't really even know who they are or how to address themselves. That makes Eddie a very moody character. Like, he's kind of an asshole to people. He doesn't know, or he doesn't really, like, accept love from anyone. He doesn't really trust anyone. Yeah, he's a tough character. And his reaction when he learns what Flora is, for the lack of better phrasing, because of who Eddie is, I consider him to be a real hypocrite sometimes. Like, he ends up feeling like he's been tricked by Flora, even though he's doing the same thing. He has a female body, and he feels male. Flora has a male body, and she feels female. But Eddie somehow feels betrayed by that. Being very cis myself, that's not really something I can understand. Would love to have a discussion in the comments and learn more about this stuff. But yeah, Eddie wasn't super likable, but definitely a very complicated and interesting character. Flora, a big thing that comes up between Flora and Eddie is that Eddie is like, well, so the unnamed will come across slavers, give the slaves the birth control, and send them on their way, because she's only one person. She can't really protect them, but she's going to do what she can. Eddie is like, oh, here's some slavers and the slaves, so she'll shoot them, or he'll shoot them or poison them or what have you. He will kill the slavers, take the slaves back to nowhere, and kind of let them learn how to lead their own lives. Flora, in the way that she was brought up, will actually trade for the slaves, which Eddie does not agree with. Like, no, you don't trade for slaves, you kill the slavers. But with Flora, she's someone who doesn't want to cause trouble, doesn't want to make trouble for her people, would rather just trade because it keeps things peaceful, and they still end up getting the slaves so that they can lead them into protection. Different ways, not only of dealing with procreation, but different ways of dealing with this huge problem of female slaves in this world. Eddie is very much... I don't feel comfortable labeling his sexuality, because when you get into labels are a big discussion in this series. I think labels get really complicated anymore. But Eddie, like I said, female-bodied, feels very male, is male as far as he is concerned, as well as far as Flora is concerned. Eddie is very much a male. Flora respects how Eddie feels about himself. And Eddie is very into women. Like, he likes women, doesn't want anything to do with men, which is a huge problem for the people of nowhere, particularly Eddie's mother, who's like, I want you to have kids, I want you to make something, I want you to do something with your life. Another great point in these books, a lot of these main characters don't have kids or don't want to have kids at that time. Love the discussion of not being required to have kids. I think more books need to have that discussion. I'm not going to have kids, ever. Yeah, I'm only 25 and I'm not going to have kids. Deal with it. And I loved that discussion in these books, because Eddie's like, no, I don't want to raise a kid. I don't want to bring a kid into this world. Are you kidding me? Flora ends up wanting to have kids, but being male-bodied, as far as she knows, she can't have kids. Also, she's been cut. That makes having kids, like, not really possible for her. And anyway, she has the desire to be pregnant, which, again, is something awesome that comes up in this book. Flora is a trans woman, does not have the body to get pregnant, but wishes that she could be. These characters, man, I'm telling you. The last character I want to discuss is Alice. Alice is in the second 2 books in this trilogy. Alice is cisgendered, pansexual. She'll sleep with any adult that she takes a liking to. Like, she does have to actually like the person as a person in order to sleep with them. She's the one getting it the most in these books. She's the one that everyone falls in love with, which I've known people like that. I've seen that. So I didn't really like Alice whenever she was first introduced as a character. I end up really liking her towards the end. Like, she's complicated. She's her own character. She works on making drugs throughout this series, which is something that's really hard to come across. So she pays a lot of attention to herbs. She finds old laboratory equipment when she can, or she'll make her own so she can make drugs. Yeah, love the characters of these books. What she does is called a hive in this series. You discover that from book 1. So a hive, and I never remember the other word for it. There's like polygamy or polyandry or there's a couple of different terms. So Mormonism, which is the religion kind of heavily featured in these books, has an idea of a man having several wives, or having more than one wife. So they flip that in these books, and it's not just a nowhere thing. A lot of cities use hives as a way to deal with the population change. So now you've got one woman for maybe every 10 men. So you'll have a woman, particularly someone like Alice, who, as far as I can tell in these books, she's hot. She's gotta be hot. Like, so a hive is essentially, basically, one woman who sleeps with a lot of men. Sometimes they get pregnant, sometimes they don't. And the city of Shy, which, oh my gosh, the city of Shy. We need to talk about this. The city of Shy in book 3 has female hives. So it is an all-female city. Like, all females. There's this crazy number of females. And they also have hives. I'm not going to have a spoiler section in this video, which is kind of killing me, because I really, really want to talk about the city of Shy. Whenever I learned about the city of Shy in the 3rd book, I'm just like, oh my gosh. So just know the city of Shy is mind-blowing. So that's kind of what I have to say about these. Like, there's so much more that would be like probably a whole spoilery section, but I just love these books so much, and I don't really want to give everything away, and I want you guys to read these so bad. Like, this is my favorite series ever in the world, and I don't really read series. I actually came across these books kind of by accident. Like, I found the Book of the Unnamed Midwife on a shelf at this House of Books, which is a bookstore in my town, and honestly, it had a pretty cover. It had an intriguing premise, and I will pretty much pick up any book that discusses sexuality, gender, midwifery, things like that. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna get this. And I start reading it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what happens next? Like, what is this series? I find the 2nd book, like I said, it's not my favorite, but I still really loved it. The 3rd book has started off really slow for me. I feel like it's a little more of a slow burn starter. But when it got to the city of Shy, I can't tell you about the city of Shy, but the city of Shy, oh my gosh, like, Meg Elison, how did you do it? Ugh. How the city of Shy comes to be full of women, just, I'm not going to talk about it, not only because I don't want to spoil you for it, but being not a super queer person and living in Montana, I'm going to say those are the two things that really hold me back. I don't think I'm the person to really talk to you about the city of Chi and have a good discussion with it. I don't have that kind of education. It's been a while since I've taken those kind of classes. I really hope someone who is queer identified needs to read this series and talk about the city of fucking Chi. So mind-blowing. And just the trans stuff that comes up and the sexuality stuff that comes up, and it's all so great, and I cannot express to you how much I love these books. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the more I love something, the more I just struggle to talk about it, and I'm getting really rambly now. I've already told you about the books. I'm going to end this before I get more rambly than I already am, but I really love these books. Please give them a try. They are only available in paperback because not a ton of people have read them. Read them more. Maybe look at a super pretty hardback release. I don't know. The hardbacks are always... The hardbacks of series tend to look really, really nice. I'm getting rambly. You're all great. Read this series. Read The Road to Nowhere Trilogy by Meg Elison. I don't read series very often at all, so you gotta know that this has gotta be a good one. Like, subscribe, be my friend so we can talk about this, or leave a comment so I can tell you about this. Ugh. Have a great day.